Morning, my name's Shaun. I'm one of the museum volunteers here, and I'm here to talk to you about the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War was fought from 1754 to 1763. A very important person in American history actually set off the French and Indian War here in North America. Young George Washington was on a mission. He was trying to get a commission in the British Army, and he accidentally shot, well, not so much accidentally, he did shoot a French envoy, which set off a whole series of diplomatic events that led to the French and Indian War. French and Indian War actually was mostly between France and Great Britain here in North America, but it encompassed a much larger war across Europe. So in many ways it was a lot like the First World War. It's significant in American history because the American Revolution was actually fought over the taxes that the British were imposing to try and pay for the bills that they had run up fighting the French and Indian War. I am dressed as a common French civilian would have been dressed in the first half of the 1700s. I'll go over some of the clothing I've got on. I've got on a stocking hat called a toque. This was actually a French sailor's cap. They would wear these things year-round, summer and winter. Winter, of course, it would help keep your head warm, and summer would actually help keep sweat out of your eyes. I'm wearing a sleeved waistcoat, more or less like a jacket. You would not be seen in your plain shirt sleeves in this time period. It was considered to be going out in your underwear. Now, if you were working out in a field or something like that, perhaps you would be just in your shirt sleeves. But for common everyday use, you would be probably at least in the bare minimum of a sleeved waistcoat or something. I have on knee breeches, which are pants which go from here to just below the knee. Below that, I have on leggings, which protect my long stockings. They're held up with a garter here, and on my feet I have straight lash shoes, which you probably can't see. Straight lash shoes are made without a right or left foot. This was a cheap common man sort of shoe, and as you wore them, they became right and left footed. Okay, in this time period, everyone had flintlock muskets. The same technology they would use to start a flint and steel fire was what actually fired the musket here. And I don't know how well this will show up, but we'll try. This is a piece of steel, and here's a piece of flint. Well, a couple of sparks are dancing off there. Basically what's happening is this rock, this piece of flint, is actually harder than the steel, and it's scraping off little bits of metal, which are those sparks. That same technology would fire a flintlock musket. You see here, here's a piece of flint here, and this would be the steel. This is called a frizzen. This gun here is a fusee to shot. This is a hunting musket, kind of equivalent to a modern day shotgun. I'll go over the quick loading sequence here right now. You would take a bit of powder. I have my powder horn here. You would measure out a measure of powder. You would dump it down the barrel. You would take some kind of wadding. You could use grass, leaves. I have a little bit of this fiber here, which actually is called tow. This is the fiber that they use to make linen fabric. You could put some of that down there. You would ram that down with your ramrod. You would then follow up with a lead bullet and ram that down and put some more wadding on top of that, ramming everything down. And now the gun would be loaded, but not primed. So the last step would be to put a little bit of powder here in this depression called the pan. So you would take a little bit of powder, put it in there, you would close the frizzen, and now this gun would be ready to fire. Now, if you're really good at this, you could probably do this once every 20 seconds. I'm not that good. I only can get it to about 2 times a minute, probably. But anyway, we're going to get ready to pretend fire here. So you pull the trigger. As you pull the trigger, that flint flies forward, hits that frizzen, kicks it open, sends sparks down into the pan, which would send fire into the barrel and theoretically set off the main charge. Now, I say theoretically because I've had these guns not go off on a warm, humid day, and I've had them go off in a rainstorm. So it's a matter of luck to a certain extent. But everyone was equally armed, so you equally had the same advantages and disadvantages. Now, that would be the civilian musket. The regular military had a much more robust gun. It's very similar. This is the model 1728, which would have been issued to the French regulars that were here in North America. And same technology, same flint and steel, same frizz and everything else, but it's much more robust. It's a larger caliber. It uses a metal ramrod as opposed to a wooden ramrod. It's a lot more robust. And as I say, it used a much larger caliber ball that went into it. Now, some of the things that were issued to these guys, it wasn't a whole lot here. They would be issued blankets, which I have wrapped up on a tump line. This is a burden strap. And they could use this for a variety of different things. This is kind of the equivalent of a backpack right now. But you put it on top of your head, and you can carry fairly large and heavy loads with this. You lift with your legs, and you use your spine to your advantage here. They would also be issued a couple of knives. These folding knives here, these are called Siam knives, kind of in a Siamese style. This one is kind of a table eating knife. It's actually sharp. You can cut things with it, but it's got a blunt tip for spreading. And this one is also very sharp. This is an awl. An awl was used for everything, for putting holes in leather, wood, and things like that. They would actually just ship the metal parts of these when they would be shipped. A lot of things were shipped by canoe in this time period. So the less space that was taken up, the better. So you would make a handle when you got on site. So this handle is made out of a piece of antler here. Most people had very long hair in this time period, so you'd need a comb to try and keep everything straight here. This one's made out of actually horn. So it's a little bit translucent. I don't know if it'll show there a little bit. They were given a couple of hanks of thread, which I've got wound around these little handmade winders here. They would be given 6 needles. They would be given a pound of powder per man per month. So they would actually wrap these up in kind of a variety of different packages. This is a 1 pound tobacco carrot, which they would just wrap it around a stick, and they would gradually peel that off here. In this time period, most everyone smoked. They learned it from the natives. Everyone from little kids to women, everyone smoked. So it was, no one had anybody to tell them it was a bad idea. All right. Get on to cooking here. You would usually have 3 or 4 guys that would kind of group together to kind of form a group that would actually make their meals. They were given food that wasn't necessarily appetizing. They would have hard bread, which is like, basically this is a lump of dough that has been baked very hard. It's been pricked with a fork so that it actually lets the moisture escape. This stuff is so hard they would actually have to break it up. They would use it for making stews and things like that. They would be given salt pork, which you'd have to rinse out. So of the group, you might have one guy would carry the pot, another guy might carry an axe. They would split up their duties. And then they would all eat out of the same pot. So you would use something like this dipper here that they would then use to dip their stew out of their pot. There are references to young guys arriving at a camp, and they would have their cold stew actually still in the pot there, and they'd be so hungry they would sit down to eat it immediately, and they would actually get sick. The older guys learned, make a fire, heat up your stew, then eat it. So that was something that they learned along the way. Now, you see I have the shot pouch and a powder horn here. The regular Army guys actually had a couple of advantages. They would use something called a gargassier, a cartridge carrier, a belly box. This belt would go around your waist, and it would also have a few extra tools on here. The bayonet is right here, which would go on the end of the musket. With the civilian musket, if you ran out of ammunition, you pretty much had a club. But with the military musket, you would also have the bayonet, which would give you the advantage of having a spear to keep someone further away from you. They also generally would have had a sword, mostly in Europe, on this belt carriage. But here in North America, they discovered that a hatchet or a tomahawk was actually more practical for going through the woods. A sword would actually catch on brush and things like that, and this was much more handy for making camp and building your fires and everything else. All right. A lot of folks in this time period did a lot of farming. So this was the muck boot of the period here. These wooden shoes, we often associate them with Dutch people. But most of Europe actually used these things, and these would be just common shoes that you would use whenever you would actually be getting into a messy situation. They were also used a lot by blacksmiths, presumably because if you're working around hot sparks, and if a hot spark went down your shoe, this is a quick way to get your shoe off. You just kick it very quickly here. They learned a lot from the natives in terms of smoking and various things, learning to survive in the wilderness, but they also learned how to make moccasins, which would be a quick, it's described as a decent way of going barefoot. But if you needed a very quick shoe, moccasins were very, very convenient. All right. See if I've forgotten anything else. Generally, they would not have had a canteen. However, in this modern time period, you do need some way of carrying water with you. They most often would be going from stream to stream and just drinking directly from the water source. In modern times, we have to have some conveyance, although they did have references to gourds being used for storing water. And that pretty much sums up everything that I brought out here today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask the museum staff and see if they can help you out with getting an answer. Thanks so much for your time.